Welcome everybody. We are here for the voices of our community. My name's Kate. I'm a community welfare worker with 20 years plus experience in a myriad of services, government and non-government. Mandatory vaccination policies were introduced into many community service organisations at the end of 2021 and are still rolling out now. So we worked in these organisations as we align to their mission statements and their values, such as give service to all, regardless of health or political opinions, seek fairness, equity and inclusion for all, encourage self-determination, choice and autonomy, transform the causes of poverty and challenge causes of human rights abuses and human injustice. So we believed that the mandatory vaccinations conflicted with these value systems, and therefore we basically said no to forced vaccination or to be showing our private medical information, and we were fired. We are also additionally concerned that lockdowns, forced and coerced vaccinations affected our vulnerable clients and the communities we've worked with adversely, and we are no longer willing to be part of the problem and wanted to be part of a solution. So we joined together and we created Community Services Speak Out to raise these issues, advocate and progress a vision for an ethical and transparent community and society. So I'm delighted to have here one of the founding members or women involved in Community Services Speak Out, Rainbow, who is was an alcohol and other drug worker. So if you'd like to introduce, if I hand over to you now, Rainbow, to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Rainbow. So I was doing alcohol and other drug counselling for an organisation. When the mandatory vaccinations came in, I couldn't actually do that, and I couldn't actually support people through autonomy when that organisation was telling me that I had to push a vaccine. I now do a little bit on my own, and but we don't need to go into that. All right.
What was your role involved? What sort of work? Because not everyone understands the sector and how we work with people. So as an alcohol and other drug worker, what were you looking at? Who were your clients? What were you trying to do?
Okay. So my clients were clients that were, well, obviously had a drug and alcohol problem. Quite often they had a mental health problem that went with it. So we actually did one-on-one counselling, we did group work, and that was my section. There was also a section where there was a residential rehab as well, but I didn't work in that section.
Okay. Yeah. And the aim of working with the people was to do what?
Harm minimisation. So for somebody that is going through legal issues, they've just gotten out of jail, they're going through facts, then they were referred to us and we help them lower, if not completely abstain from alcohol and other drugs.
And what was the clientele? What sort of life experiences or what were they going through that you were trying to assist them with? I know it's drug and alcohol, but the underlying, reasons and the underlying what you were seeing.
Well, with drug and alcohol, people don't just, wake up one morning and go, oh, I think I'm going to, become an alcoholic, or I think I'm going to become a drug addict. There's a lot of things that build up to it. That can be, a traumatic childhood. That could be one traumatic incident. Everybody's different and they come from all walks of life. It could be somebody that, is a single mum with 4 children, or it could be someone who's happily married. Yeah. And all different classes as well. Yeah.
And were the stakes pretty high for some of the people that came through your service if they What's that about? Can you explain that?
So, like I said a bit earlier, some people were referred by corrections.
Mm-hmm.
So if they didn't come and complete and then start having negative urines and stuff, they'd go back to jail.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty high stakes. Other people were being investigated by facts, so they needed to complete our programs as well. Others had already had children removed, so they were completing our programs so they could get their children back. Yeah. Others were, husband, wife said, go and deal with your problem, or we're done. Yeah, children also, mum, dad, go and deal with your problem, or we're not going to speak to you anymore. Mm.
So the lead up to when the lockdown started happening, how did your service at the time, how was your service affected?
So we did a really quick shutdown of our community service offices, and we were actually one of the first services to get up and running online straight away. Yeah, we started with Smart Recovery, then we started opening our own programs up for online, and we did phone, and we did one-on-one Zoom as well. So we actually got that done really fast.
So going to online. So yeah. What sort of effects did you see? Because you were still working during the lockdown, till most of the lockdown. What effects did you see on your vulnerable client groups from lockdowns?
So quite a few dropped off from face-to-face to online, and that was because data is quite expensive on Zoom. They didn't have the technology. But then we were finding we were getting different clients that were, say, single parents and couldn't normally go out and do a group program because they got their kids. They were able to sit online and do them. Mm. Yeah. So where it took away from some, it gave to others, and especially the people that had also been housebound. So we found older people as well started interacting with us as well.
Okay. And what about the people that were adversely affected from the lockdowns? What did you end up? I mean, lockdowns mean that people, what does it look like for people who are struggling with alcohol or other drug addictions to be locked down?
Well, they didn't have that outside release. So one of the things that is really important in recovery is having a support network, getting out of the house and doing new things. So they're three things you can't do in lockdown. Mm. Yeah. And, it's really hard for someone to pick up the phone when they're struggling and say, hey, I need help. It's a lot easier for someone to walk out the door and go to a service and just say, I'm here. Yeah. But it's a lot harder to switch the computer on or pick up the phone. Hmm. But it is quite easy to get, dial a bottle.
Yeah. Yep. That's an interesting point, that people were always able to get alcohol freely.
Yeah.
Lockdown.
Mm. Yeah. So we found the number of clients that started coming for alcohol actually just skyrocketed.
So they were referring themselves in, or they were coming through elsewhere? Yeah,
a lot of them were referring themselves in.
Okay. And did they talk about why they were coming through, what they were struggling with?
Quite often, yeah. Yeah. So it was struggling with lockdown, not seeing family.
Not seeing family.
Not seeing friends. So, before lockdown, it was something you pretty much took for granted. You go over to family's place once a week for dinner. You have the barbecue on Sunday. Yeah. But, all of a sudden, can't do that. Yeah. And there goes your world. Yeah.
So do you think there were people that were already struggling and then this just tipped it over with the lockdowns, or do you think the lockdowns itself caused ordinary people who were ordinarily able to cope and they went into more distress, basically?
Yeah, they did go into more distress because especially people that were in early recovery and they're just starting to get their strategies in place and they're starting to learn a bit of resilience, all of a sudden that's all gone. So they haven't got the network that they had. They can't go out into that, gardening group that they joined or meditation group that they joined. They can't go for coffee with friends. Yeah, so all of that gone.
And they would be normal strategies you'd be working with them on, as ways helping people work out what they can do for themselves when they're feeling, distressed or feeling like they want to reach out to alcohol and other drugs. You'd be working with them on strategies that they can put in place. So how did that change? What sort of strategies did you end up having to come up with or help people think through?
So you needed to come up with strategies of what they can do around the house, how they can actually reach out. And it took a bit, but, some of them did start to get used to Zoom and they did take that on board, but some didn't.
And what is some didn't? What did that look like? Do they just the non-engagement, not turning up to group sessions on Zoom? Yeah.
So you can always tell how a client's tracking by, if they miss a group or they miss a session when they're normally quite regular and quite consistent.
Yeah. And what do you feel like, what was missing? Do you think there's something that is missing from Zoom to an in-person group session or in-person counselling session that can't be replicated?
So it's a much different experience having somebody sitting there face-to-face with you and having a group sitting there face-to-face than on Zoom, because on Zoom, you can't say to somebody, you have to have your video on, because for whatever, technology is not perfect all the time and you don't know the reason why they can't have the video on. Okay. And the next thing is you can only see here up. So you don't know what's going on. We had incidents of where, somebody picked up a drink during a group. And it was a really quick thing. And I noticed it and I went, "What are you drinking?" And she said, "Oh, I'm having a wine. Isn't that allowed?" And I went, "Well, you're actually in a drug and alcohol group, so no." And that triggered the rest of the group. That's something that would never happen in a face-to-face group.
Can you talk a little bit about that? What is triggering and how that works for a group that are struggling with the same addiction when something like that happens?
Yeah. So we'll just take alcohol, for instance. So if you actually see somebody having a drink of alcohol when, you're 5 weeks clean or 5 months clean, and you start to get a physical craving for it. I was like, okay, wouldn't mind to have a drink now. Then you start to get distracted. Then your brain just starts to go, if I have one drink, it's all right. I should be right with one. All right, how am I going to get that drink? Can I just, dial a bottle? But I'll only have one out of the bottle. And they start justifying it. And then, they finish group and it's downhill from there.
So can you also spell out, Rainbow, like the particular cost of a woman who has an alcohol or drug addiction, who has lost her children temporarily and needs to be part of a program like this to reclaim her child or children? Can you spell out what that looks like, and if she isn't successful, what that means in terms of generational trauma?
Okay, so someone that's lost their child, they're really emotional when they first get there. And And when they actually first come to us, they think, all I have to do is stop taking drugs or alcohol. And then once they start getting through the program, they realise that it's not just about taking the drug away. I've actually now got to deal with what caused the drug or alcohol addiction. And, you know, it can take quite some time for them to start dealing with that. Now, if they succeed, then, you know, plans put in place with vax, and the kids gradually come back and they all live happy families again. And generally they've got vax in their life for quite a while. If they don't succeed, it can quite often send somebody back down into addiction, and really, really fast. So it can be really dangerous for somebody.
And what is just firstly, what's vax?
Vax is family and community services. Yeah. So people may know them as docs, because they were docs for many years. Yeah.
Okay. So if a mother loses, or parents lose their child or the children, what's the effect, the flow-on effect for those children?
Well, the flow-on effect, especially around when we were in lockdown, we had so many parents that were not able to see their kids face to face. And that's really breaking a bond, which can be really, really damaging to a child. It can also be damaging to the parents as well. Yeah. And, you know, depending on what kind of carer they had, whether they were with family, whether they were with someone that they didn't know, it did all come back to whether, you know, the carer was actually going to answer the phone for people to talk to their children. Yeah. So, you know, there were people that that went for months without being able to see and hug their children.
Yeah.
And then at one point, it was like, you want to see your kids? Double vax.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we had a couple of clients that that hadn't seen their kids for a while, and to be able to see them, they were told unofficially that they needed to be double vaxxed before they saw the kids.
And that was through the workplace, or through particular caseworkers decided to take that on, or do you think that was more official?
That was from vax. Whether it was a particular caseworker or I don't know, but that's just what they reported to us.
Verbally or in writing?
No, they didn't have it in writing, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was a lot of different things being said, I would imagine, because it was a very confused state for everyone.
Totally.
Okay. Yeah, so with the children in particular, if a parent doesn't get themselves back on track, they can lose those children. Yeah.
And generally there's a 2-year time span where you've got that 2 years to start turning things around. And what a lot of parents actually do is when their kids first get removed, they go on a bender.
Okay.
Because they don't know how to cope with that. Yeah. They don't know what to do. And so they go on a bender, and depending on how long that bender is, will actually look good or look bad for them. So if they just do a one-night thing and then they go, right, done, this is what I need to do, and get straight into it, that looks good for them. But if they let it go for, you know, longer than a month or two, then and then once it hits the two-year mark, quite often they will be removed until they're 18.
Yeah. Okay. So would you say that the lockdowns and potential effects of mandatory and coerced vaccinations had an unduly if we look at the most vulnerable in our society, I would pinpoint it at children in foster care system, children that end up in the foster care system, the conditions that brought them there in the first place, and then unfortunately what the foster care system can look like as well. So I would name them as one of the highest and the most vulnerable groups.
Yeah.
Do you sorry?
And if you're presented with, you've got to be double vaxxed to see your kid, you're going to do it.
Yeah.
That's not an informed consent.
No.
That's I want to see my child. My child needs me.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting, because I'm aware other non-government organisations, the parents they weren't allowed to be face-to-face, but when they were going face-to-face, they didn't need to be double vaccinated. So whether or not, it's interesting that's what was relayed in your organisation at that time.
Yeah, so that was from clients reporting that.
Clients were telling you.
Yeah.
So they were being told that directly.
Yeah, but it wasn't official.
Okay.
So it wasn't the whole department was saying that.
Yep.
Yeah. So it may have just been their caseworker. It may have been who knows who it was. But that's how they took it.
Okay, that's how they heard.
That's how they perceived it. Yeah.
That's what they then came back to you and told you. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting, and not possibly not surprising with the amount of I do know with the amount of information that caseworkers were told to sort of push things along, push things, whether or not that got misconstrued as it is a definite, I don't know. Yeah. Okay, so we're talking about the costs, and would you say that the lockdowns potentially made all of that more complicated or more dire for that particular, if we just talk about that particular cohort, the parents who've lost their children, who are hoping to get them, trying to get them back through a program, and then the program is shut down quickly and then goes online. Do you feel like that put these people and this very vulnerable cohort at a disadvantage?
Yeah. So the other thing that happened was with the lockdown, we'd get information, okay, so originally it's 2 weeks to flatten the curve. So people would make plans for that 2 weeks, and they'd have interviews, they'd have meetings, they'd have things face-to-face to get to that point, and then go, oh no, we can't do it because we're still in lockdown. So that would just extend it more and extend it more and extend it more. So by that time, their depression and anxiety's going through the roof.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Now, do you feel like, as community services speak out, we have written sector letters. You and others have written sector letters about the alcohol and other drugs sector and sent it off to the relevant ministers. Do you feel like ministers were interested in hearing your first-hand experiences of what's happened to the vulnerable cohort?
No. The answers we got were pretty vague and passing the buck. Yeah. Oh no, that's not my department. That department. Yeah. No one seems to be taking responsibility. Yeah.
So when you got to the point of, what was it like leading up to mandatory vaccination policy coming into the organisation that you're working for? Can you talk that through?
Okay, so I had been working from home for 4 or 5 months, totally from home, not going into the office at all. And when there was an inkling of it, I actually contacted management and I said, what does this look like? If I don't get it, what does this look like? Can I negotiate? And I wanted to negotiate because I could do my work from home. And they didn't have any answers for me. I think it went about 6 weeks. And then I went to the doctor, and the doctor gave me medical exemption for 3 months, a temporary one. I took that back to work and they wouldn't accept it. So I went back.
What reason did they give you for not accepting it?
Apparently it wasn't them that didn't accept it. It was New South Wales Health that didn't accept it.
A medical exemption from a doctor?
From a doctor, yep. And so then I went straight back to the doctor and she gave me 2 weeks sick leave, gave me a doctor's certificate. Went back again, she gave me another 2 weeks. Went back again and she gave me another 3 weeks. So that was a total of 7 weeks that she gave me a doctor's certificate for, to come back to work, where I told them that I wouldn't, I'm choosing not to get a experimental vaccine, and they fired me.
Okay. And why were you working in the sector? What drew you to the sector in the first place?
Oh, lots of things. So there's a bit of lived experience. There's a bit of living with somebody with a lived experience. And it's sort of, I was in one particular area. I worked in the music industry for many years, and the particular place where I worked ended up closing, and I was like, oh, time for something different. And then one day it just came to me, why not be a drug and alcohol counsellor? I've been doing it for 20 years. I may as well get paid for it. So I went and upskilled, and here I am.
And how long in the sector were you working?
I was there almost 5 years.
Okay. And what did you feel about it? Did you enjoy the work? Did you enjoy your...
Oh, I love the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could relate to the clients and understood something about them and cared for them.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So what was it for you? Why did you turn around and say, no, I'm not going to do this?
Well, when vaccination was first mentioned, I just had the instinct of, no, I'm not getting that. Then I found out that there's actually treatment for it. There's treatment for COVID. And, when I started looking at things, numbers didn't add up. They just didn't. The whole thing did not make sense. And I couldn't put 2 and 2 together about why it didn't make sense. And then I sort of thought, the last time I, was in this position where I couldn't make sense was right before I split up with my ex-husband, because that turned quite domestic violence. Yeah. And I just went, oh my God, this is just like domestic violence. And I don't know science. I, have no idea about the vaccine really. But my rationale is, if COVID exists, if the vaccine does exactly what it's supposed to do, they wouldn't need to put these measures in to get me vaccinated. I'd just walk in and do it. Another thing was, all I wanted to do was negotiate with my work. They would not negotiate with me at all. If they would have worked with me, instead of saying, do it or out, then it could have been a different story. But everything just went, no, this is just not right. And in the end, I had to go with my gut. Yeah.
So it just all didn't make sense and stack up. And so when you say you'd experienced a domestic violence relationship and it was feeling familiar and similar, can you spell that out a little bit? What sort of things were feeling the same?
I was getting triggered physically. Well, I had 7 weeks off work. That was like just anxiety. Yeah. I got a mental health plan. I went to a psychologist and everything. And the physical sensations that I was feeling was exactly the same as when I was back there. Yeah.
What were you feeling? Sorry, I don't want to put words into your mouth. Was there a feeling of powerlessness, or what was it like?
Confusion. There was a lot of fear. And it just did not make sense. And I'm the type of person that, needs to make sense of things.
Yeah, so something felt really wrong.
Yeah.
And this push to do it, regardless of how you were feeling, and regardless that your instincts were saying, this isn't right, I'm not comfortable with this, I'm not comfortable with this for my body, and the push to keep doing it and negating your own experience in domestic violence is called gaslighting.
Yep.
So those sorts of experiences felt familiar.
Oh, yeah.
So what would you say to the argument, because this is basically where community services speaks out was started, was because the argument and the push for everyone to be vaccinated was for the common good and to support our vulnerable communities. And so anyone who didn't vaccinate was seen as selfish and just not caring about the most vulnerable members of our community. So we as community sector, we work with the most vulnerable members of our community. So what would you say to that argument that, people like you and I are selfish and aren't looking out for the most vulnerable?
I pretty much, from the get-go, said, I'm not going to get COVID. It's just not going to happen. Now, over the Christmas New Year period, my daughter got COVID. My daughter was very sick with COVID. And I looked after her. And kept testing positive, kept testing negative. I'm fit. I'm healthy. I eat well. I do everything I need to do to stay fit and healthy. I don't get the common cold usually. I don't get the flu. I don't get shots for those either. So I knew I was not going to be a person that was going to put anybody else at risk.
Yeah. And from what you've talked about, the actual counter argument could be true, that the measures that have been put in place have affected adversely the most vulnerable members of our community with very little thought and no accountability with our letters and us trying to address it with the politicians.
Yeah.
For those people, so we are going to start up a website soon and hoping to connect into people still in the sector to help offer support, and because part of the most difficult part of it was sort of jumping into the abyss unknown, wasn't it? And the level of support we could offer each other going through that, I think, was incredibly important. What would you say to people who are still in the sector that are going to listen to this, and some things might be resonating with them, and there's things that don't feel comfortable for them, that what they're seeing for their clients or what they're feeling inside themselves? Do you have anything you'd say to them?
So I know there are a lot of people out there that felt they had no choice because they couldn't lose their job for particular circumstances. Like, they had mortgages to pay. They had, and they do feel quite coerced. In the end, what is your health worth to you? And I know a lot of people are probably feeling quite burnt out right about now. Yeah, because it wasn't just me or just you that left. There were quite a few people that got the sack. And somebody had to make up that shortfall before they could re-employ somebody. So think about your health. Is that house worth your health? And then you know, if you are suffering from burnout and you are getting sick from the vaccine, you're not going to be working too much longer anyway.
And then seeing the because what's happened in the last 2 years with lockdowns is going to have a long-term effect, isn't it, on the clients? It's not something that just goes back to normal and just springs back to normal. We're going to be seeing, they're actually saying now that as the lockdowns, you know, we come out of lockdown and as things return to some sense of normality, that's when we're actually going to start to see everything's going to come out, what's been happening behind closed doors for the last 2 years, on and off for the last 2 years, because you put very vulnerable people in situations where you shut them down. They don't have the same level of supports, family, community, or their service support, and you shut them down into homes and where they generally aren't going to have the nice backyard and, you know, enough space for everyone, and they're homeschooling children who often have disabilities and other learning difficulties, etc. And you just compile vulnerability upon vulnerability, and those effects and what that then leads to is going to be spilling out for a very long time, including taking away people's incomes.
Yeah, and that's not to mention DV, domestic violence. How, like, I cringe at the thought that, you know, someone's getting stuck in a house that they can't leave, and the resources for them have just gone down like that, and they're there with the perpetrator.
It's terrifying.
But not only, you know, there's a woman, there's quite often the children there as well. And being homeschooled and not going to school and being actually sighted every day, there's a level of eyes that are just not there, and safety that's just not there.
Absolutely. And anyone that comes in and says we're doing it for the most vulnerable, you would assume that they've taken all of that into account, that they have actually seen that as a risk, and they still felt COVID was serious enough to do that to the most vulnerable members of our community. And that is what we've been asking from the politicians, just to show us how they assess that. And we haven't heard any response that makes any sense at this point in time. And it's heartbreaking, isn't it, Rainbow? Like, it genuinely breaks the community sector and the services and the people who work and advocate, it breaks our hearts.
And the other thing that I didn't touch on before was I literally went to the doctor, got a doctor's certificate, come back home, and I said to my boss, I've just got a doctor's certificate, and I was supposed to go into a group and do a parenting group, and I had to shut my computer, and that was it. I didn't have any ability to contact any clients to do a handover or let them know I'm not going to be there. So that can actually be really disruptive to a client, especially if you've got a connection with your counsellor. And, you know, you might have 5 or 6 different counsellors at that service, but, you know, you will have clients that will only go to you and only feel comfortable with you. They've been through so much and you know so much of their story to be done with no explanation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that, because we all know therapeutic work relies on the relationship between the therapist and the client. It is what the work stems from. So to treat people like they're replaceable, that the years of experience, your years of experience, where you're coming from in your heart and your mind and your skill level can be replaced that easily, and to not take into account the effect of clients and how that might detrimentally affect them. And we're not talking about a small little blip, are we?
No.
We're talking about stuff that can cause generational trauma. Or exasperate generational trauma.
Exactly.
Is there anything else you wanted to say?
No, I think that's about it.
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for your beautiful heart and mind, and doing what you felt was the right thing for yourself and for the clients you work for. Yeah, it's very noted and it's very appreciated.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, bye.